hunting group in South Boston, bouncing back and forth between abusive foster homes. He worked as a janitor at MIT, where he solved the seemingly impossible problem when no one was looking, while later raiding the trouble with the cops, but avoided his jail sentence by agreeing to work with a professor on developing mathematical theory and seeing a therapist. At first he reacted poorly to the therapist until he found Sean, who identified with and trusted over time. Will struggled to commit to his girlfriend Skylar because he was afraid of being abandoned and hurt by her as he'd been hurt by his foster parents. Eventually, Sean helped Will overcome his fear of abandonment and renewed his ability to grow close to others.
Reactive attachment disorder is characterized as a trauma and stressor disorder that develops during childhood. It results in problems with intimacy, emotional withdrawal, and inhibited relations derived from abusive or negligent parenting.
Will at first met with many different psychologists, and he was uncooperative in all of them. He would ridicule, dissect, and outright disrespect the psychologist, leading all but Sean to refuse to work with him. Will fell in love with Skylar, but was too afraid of what she might think of him if she knew his past. In order to protect himself from getting hurt, he pushed her away and lied to her by saying he didn't love her. Many people diagnosed with this disorder struggle academically and do not perform well in school. However, Will was different. He could solve complex mathematical equations that had taken esteemed professors at MIT multiple years to solve.
The best treatment is trauma-forced cognitive behavioral therapy, which treats underlying attachment disruptions and promotes emotional stability and regulation. When a client is diagnosed with attachment disorder, the therapist often takes on the role that a client's parent failed to do by becoming someone the client feels they can trust. The long-term goal of this form of therapy is to ensure that the client is able to engage in meaningful, trusting relationships and develop a healthy self-esteem.
The film displays a fairly accurate representation of reactive attachment disorder because Will displayed multiple symptoms of this disorder, including being uncooperative, fearing intimacy, and displaying aggressive behavior. This disorder is caused by the client's parents failing to form an attachment to their child that makes the child feel secure and nurtured. Will felt abandoned by his birth parents, and his relationships with his foster parents were filled with physical abuse. People with an attachment disorder often have very low self-esteem, which Will displays by thinking Skylar is better than him and by still hanging around his friends that are unsuccessful. This film is of educational value to the public because it shows them the underlying causes of this disorder, which in daily life a person with this disorder may seem cold and uncaring. However, the film displays that in reality the person is just afraid of being hurt. This person avoids relationships in order to protect themselves rather than avoiding these relationships to hurt the other person. The film has both serious and humorous aspects. Will often makes jokes as defense mechanisms so he can avoid dealing with the conflict at hand. Sean realizes this and also engages in these jokes as a means of connecting with Will. An example of this is Sean telling of how his wife used to fart in her sleep. This may seem insignificant, but through this story Sean showed Will that people are still worthy of love despite their flaws. A serious part of the movie occurs when Sean repeatedly tells Will that his foster parents abusing him is not his fault, which triggers an extreme emotional outpouring from Will, who begins to violently sob as he realizes this truth and is able to release himself from blame.
We learn that people aren't always what they seem. Although Will is a janitor, his intelligence surpasses everyone around him despite no formal education. This can also be seen in Will's apparent avoidance of others. You might assume he's just cold-hearted and sarcastic, but he's actually just unable to form trusting, stable relationships with others. Two scenes in the movie really hit home on reaction attachment disorder. In one scene, Skylar asks Will to come to California with her, but he declines, thinking she will find out something about him that will make her want a take back. He pushes her away before he can get hurt and tells her he doesn't love her. This shows his troubles with intimate relationships. In another scene, Sean finally gets through to Will when he repeats it's not your fault to him. Will becomes an emotional wreck, finally getting rid of all the blame he puts on himself. This allows Will to finally form stable relationships again. The movie kept you glued to the screen by simultaneously making you laugh and cry as it took you through the life of Will Hunting. It allowed you to explore how psychological disorders affect people in their lives, a subject made all the more interesting by its lack of representation in current media and movies.
I would highly recommend this movie to anyone. It's my favorite movie and I've watched it many times. This film not only has brilliant actors such as Matt Damon, Robin Williams, and the Affleck brothers, but also tells a beautiful story of healing.
Our recommendation is The Babadook, an Australian horror film based on depression. The mother in the movie has signs of major depressive disorder and seasonal affective disorder. The monster, called the Babadook, is a figment of the depressed mother's imagination, growing stronger the more she lets it into her life and the more she denies it. Once it gets inside her, it endangers the life of her son, and she can never truly get rid of it, having to lock it in her closet and feed it worms to satisfy its needs. It's very similar to depression in that fact that it causes damage to family, and denial does not solve it, often making it worse. And you have to take Prozac to treat it, but can never truly get rid of it, which is much like the worms. And these are our sources. Thanks, and Gigo.